Hey everyone, welcome back to the Lookout. If you've been following us this week, you know that we've been looking at the Garnet Fire burning in the southern Sierra down east of Fresno. And you know that the fire burned through 3,000 acre research forest that was supposed to get burned on purpose in a prescribed fire. Today we're going to talk with Scott Sherbinski and Bethany Hanna. They both work with the Climate Wildfire Institute, which is a nonprofit that had a grant from CAL FIRE to try to do this 3,000 acre burn. Throughout my career, I've been working in planning a lot, and I've got to say that very few of the major projects that I've worked on planning in the last 25 years have actually ever come to fruition. This stuff looks easy on paper, and when it comes down to it, putting fire on the ground at a large scale, between getting the environmental compliance done and then getting a burn window, and then actually having the resources or the political will for someone to go ahead and let you light the match. It's really hard to get this stuff done. So we're going to talk with these guys about their experience with this project and what they think the future looks like for projects like this. Well, welcome to the Lookout, you guys. Thanks for coming on. I know you guys have had a really busy week. I was wondering if you guys could introduce yourselves and tell us how you came to work with the Climate Wildfire Institute.
Yeah, thanks, Zeke. My name is Scott Sherbinski. I'm a program manager for CWI. I've been with the organization for a little over 2 years now. Prior to that, I worked for the National Park Service for a long time as a wildlife biologist, and then worked with some nonprofits doing implementation work kind of up and down the Sierra and throughout the state of California and Nevada. So shortly after I started with CWI, we executed our agreement with CAL FIRE for the Teakettle project. It's a forest health grant for about $5.8 million to implement large-scale prescribed burn. And because of my background with implementation and handling implementation contracts, I was selected as the person on the team to kind of support and oversee moving that forward, that project forward.
I'm Bethany Hanna. I was the second employee at CWI, so really a part of the startup of the organization, and certainly the startup of the Teakettle. My background originally was in suppression. I spent 7 years with the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management, and then through a very circuitous route, ended up in the nonprofit sector, and have always kind of circled around fire. But the Teakettle specifically, I was a part of the initial conversations when the Climate Wildfire Institute took on the project as originally the fiscal sponsor of the grant. But we very quickly stepped into the program management role, kind of restructured the initial vision, which is, this project is really led by Malcolm North, who is the lead researcher on the Teakettle Experimental Forest. And he's worked many years to get this going. So this is it's been a hard week in that sense. But I think Malcolm is very much a realistic kind of guy, and it's just saying, yep, this has always been a possibility. So yeah.
Okay, so can you give us a little timeline on when you guys got funded and where you were in the process of, what was your expected timeline?
The grant itself, the timeline extended through 2029. And these grants have a pretty big buffer because I think the state is understands that the planning process can have all sorts of barriers and everything from weather to fire seasons to regulatory constraints. So the NEPA process takes a lot of time, and also the Teakettle is high enough that the snow comes in, and the opportunity to do field work is shut down for a long period of each year, and so we ran up against that in terms of the timing. I mean, I was hopeful that we would be burning this next year.
Okay, so you mentioned that you guys were kind of in the NEPA process. Can you describe what kind of hoops you were going to have to jump through before you could start cutting down trees and digging fire lines?
Yeah, so when we started this project in August of 2023, some of the NEPA stuff was already being coordinated between Pacific Southwest Research Station, the Sierra National Forest, and Region 5 was also helping to support with some capacity. So those conversations and those processes were already in place when we started the project. So we got this decision memo signed at the end of last summer, 2024. And during that time, we had already started doing surveys for threatened and endangered species, specifically spotted owls. And then this spring, we started doing all our cultural surveys. They are wrapped up in the perimeter of the project. It's a 3,800 acre project in total, about 16 miles of fuel break around the exterior, and then one large burn unit in the interior. So all the surveys were completed. We had to do full floristic botanical surveys this spring and this fall, and those were largely ready to go. And we were just closing out an RFP to contract all the hazard tree removal and fuel related work around the perimeter, just as the Garnet Fire started. And then this past week, Monday, after this last weekend, when the fire progressed all the way through the project, we put a stop work order on all our contracts. But we were ready to go immediately as soon as we get a contract signed. We were going to have boots on the ground doing.
Okay. So basically, it's been about 2 years since you got the funding and you were pretty much through the process, the planning process. I think one of the frustrating things for me as a kind of practitioner is that like we've got projects. I say we, it's the company I used to work for, Firestorm, has projects on the Tahoe that have been pretty much on the books for like 10 years and have either been held up because the Nature Conservancy, who was funding the work, lawyers got involved with the liability concerns, or there hasn't been a burn window. So there's been millions of dollars of implementation sitting for almost a decade just because of the hurdles that are faced after you get through the permitting. So you guys were at the first step, but there's no guarantee that you would have gotten a burn window in the next 5 years, right?
100%. And I will say that is another process that was really far along. We contracted a type 1 burn boss to draft a burn plan, and we were starting through this review of that with the forest and getting really close to buttoning that up as well. Again, the hopes in the kind of the trajectory we're on is that we would do the fuel break stuff this fall, do pile burning in the spring, and then do the broadcast burn in the fall of 26. But like you said, there's no guarantee of that. Burn windows, the clock is always ticking with wildfire. We went through this last year with the basin fire when that started kind of down below the project as well. We were really fearful of that fire doing exactly what the Garnet Fire did.
And who was your burn boss?
Ben Jacobs.
Yeah, so we had a burn with Ben in Calaveras Big Trees
Yeah.
2 years ago, 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was really similar to Teakettle in that we had crews out falling hazard trees for weeks. And one of our guys got killed. And I think people, people forget that when you lay out a burn unit, like the burn boss ends up, like the burn boss says, hey, we're going to put the line here. And then someone goes and cuts that line and they get killed by a snag. And that there's all these things that are as dangerous as wildland fire that end up happening on prescribed burn prep. Just to throw that in there for keeping this stuff real,
Yeah, and Zeke, I feel for you. I'm sorry to hear about that. And I'm sure you've been down around the Teakettle. Like it's no exception down there. Like the drought and the beetle kill damage to those big old trees. Like the snags are both the standing dead and the live unstable trees are a real issue up there. And that was going to take a lot of time and a lot of careful thinking to get through and make sure that those hazards are mitigated as we're going in. And I do think like some of the decisions that have been made, and I'm not a fire, my background is not in fire, but I think some of the operations decisions that were made on this fire were based over that concern as well.
Right. And when they still might not hold that north end just because of the fuels conditions. I think, that some of these projects, they end up feeling almost impossible to pull off. I don't know how well we understand what we're trying to do. When we're going to put low severity fire into a place that's had high severity fire in the past. You know,
Mhm.
how did you guys kind of go about having these conversations about like developing your prescription, the level of mortality you wanted? What were your objectives for this project?
Malcolm and I are actually going to do a flyover on Sunday, so we'll have some eyes on what the project area looks like post fire. But one of the reasons CWI got involved in this project is because it is on an experimental forest, and the research that this forest has produced, specifically around prescribed fire, is world renowned. And so Malcolm, I think, really, because of the research that he's been doing over the last couple of decades on prescribed fire, really had a clear understanding of what this forest needed. And that informed the way the prescription was written. And it's interesting, researchers who have ongoing research projects in these forests, they're heartsick for a few days and then they pivot. Right, this happened. We're gonna look at it a different way now, and I think Malcolm is probably approaching it in a similar way. But that link between research and practice and research and policy is why CWI got involved in this project, because the organization wasn't intended to be an implementation focused organization originally. Um, so all of that to say, when in terms of the way this burn was approached and the scale of it, it was really informed by the researchers involved in it. And
And
Scott, you want to talk about specifics?
Yeah, so it was developed, the burn plan itself was developed, kind of based on Ben Jacobs' knowledge and experience in burning in that area and in that terrain for a long time. You mentioned Calaveras, big trees. I think that was one of the things that, were attracted. And then we had other folks kind of providing input and an objective lens from the Forest Service, current members of Forest Service. But one of the things that drew CWI and myself to this project were exactly some of the things that you're mentioning, Zeke. Kind of like what is the research and how do we know kind of what the effects of that are? And that is one of the powerful things about the tea kettle is there's been so much research done on it. There's so much knowledge and information there. And even though this was a very specific implementation project, Malcolm and all the researchers involved in the tea kettle had a bunch of research happening around it. One of the big things that kind of blew me away when I first went down there and met with Malcolm was talking about, the duff layers around the base of these big trees and that being, potential responsibility for cooking off some of these big trees, essentially girdling them. And so they have a project that they're raking a portion of the bottom of the trees to see how that affects, fire moving through there and not having such a severe impact to some of these larger trees. So there's all sorts of research around this project that Malcolm could really talk more about.
I do want to call out, just as we're talking about these big trees, oldest or largest intact stand of old growth outside of the park system. It's also a culturally significant area for the tribes, and CWI has developed relationships and was working towards finding pathways for like the Sierra Sequoia Burn Cooperative. That is a cooperative of local community organizations and tribes focused on cultural and prescribed burning initiatives, trying to get them onto not only the burn itself, but also doing some of the prep work. And the Garnet blowing through this area it has a big impact on the tribes. There's even an origin of fire story very close to the tea kettle as well. So just want to call that out.
All right. So, do you think that we're gonna get this kind of stuff done, like elsewhere? Like when you look at the map of like how much of the Sierra is burned up, like from my perspective, the Forest Service and even Cal Fire, everyone's talking a big game about putting fire on the ground, and the it's just the support's not there. It's not happening anywhere. I feel like industrial timber companies gave up on the Forest Service as a reliable partner in the 1990s because they recognized that if they counted on the Forest Service as a stable partner and kept running mills in places where they required, the Forest Service to deliver logs, that they were going to go bankrupt. And so they completely bailed. And I wonder, the conservation community has not. But in the meantime, in the last 25 years, the conservation community, all of us have invested a huge amount of time and energy in planning and trying to work with the Forest Service. And then they they talk a big game, but nothing ever happens. Right. And so how long does conservation keep pretending that the Forest Service is a good partner? I'm sure you guys have positive partnership relationships, individual relationships with people that have helped you get this project together. But when it comes down to it, like as soon as this is a wildfire, we're going to spend $1 million a day. We're no NEPA required. We're going to put in dozer lines. We're going to do whatever we want. But 0% of that enthusiasm, freedom, funding, trust in the people on the ground pans out for things like prescribed fire. So how long do we keep pretending that we can make this happen when there's absolutely zero real support on the ground from the highest levels to to make it happen?
I mean, I think that is the most important conversation that is coming out of this experience for me personally with the tea kettle and with this burn plan is exactly the questions that you're asking. And that's a big reason why we're doing the storytelling around this and really identifying like, hey, what are the institutional barriers? Not just keep banging your head against the same brick wall, but like let's also be working on those institutional barriers and figuring out creative solutions to those as well. And I don't think you completely fall off of doing the implementation work. I don't think you ever step away from that, no matter how frustrating it is and how big of a waste of money it seems. Like I don't see how you can walk away from that. I think you have to keep after it if you want to see a positive change. How can we leverage individual partnerships that set up a longer term relationship and a longer term trust so then we can move forward with some of these bigger projects? When I started off this project, one of my big concerns is my background in implementation was working with nonprofits that wouldn't do prescribed fire because of the liability, either through the insurance or the risk aversion of the board or of the leadership team weren't willing to engage. We're doing lots of big projects, but weren't willing to engage in putting fire on the ground. And so one of the first things I did is start reaching out to other organizations to find out how they were doing that. And a lot of organizations were like, we can't, because of the same reasons, the risk intolerance of either insurance or an organizational leadership. Or if they did have the backing of that, I had organizations tell me like, yeah, we don't do that on the Forest Service because of the institutional barriers there. And why I appreciate that, that's not a solution. That's not going to get us to where we want to be. Like it's frustrating,
Yeah.
but
One of
I,
the
I can't see walking away from it.
Yeah, I agree with that. One of the things that I think about when I started my career in the late 90s, um, we were burning in Eastern Oregon really large tracts, and granted, entirely different ecosystem, but we had that institutional knowledge of how to put fire on the ground as a Forest Service crew. There were a lot of crews, a lot of resources with the Forest Service that had that knowledge, and that knowledge has somewhat fallen away. And while that's fallen away within the agencies themselves, it's starting to build up outside of those agencies
Hmm.
with the nonprofits, with the burn associations, and so on. But now we have an agency that is so used to not trusting anyone outside of the agency or that institutional mindset, um, sort of being superseded in knowledge by organizations outside, that it's hard to kind of like mesh those together. And so one thing that I was really interested in is like understanding how to develop those relationships, not only how to develop those relationships and build that trust, but how to accelerate trust. Because we always say we can only move at the speed of trust, and trust takes a long time to build. Well, how do we move that along more quickly so that we can do this implementation work at scale? um, and
Yeah.
it's cultural in many ways, but we need to reconcile that.
But it's physical too. I think like, tea kettle burned this week and next week it might be too wet to burn. Right. And so like when's
Yeah,
your window? Your window in tea kettle might actually be August burning from the top down, but no one is, after the memory of what Teakettle did in the first week of September, like no one's willing to burn in fire season.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of our hang up with getting fire done at scale is just that we have these definitions of what prescribed fire season looks like. Okay, it's after 2 inches of rain in September. And it's like, well, after 2 inches of rain in September at 7,000 feet, nothing's going to burn again.
Yeah.
So a lot of the stuff is so far beyond our control. Like institutionally, no one's going to let you burn in August. They'll say you can burn in October and then you can't get it done for 10 years. Like that's what we're running into on the Tahoe. So,
Yeah.
I think that's why I question like, okay, it's really easy to talk about putting fire on the ground at scale, but oftentimes the fire's not even going to carry at scale unless you burn in fire season,
Yeah.
right? Especially in the red fir, the high elevation landscapes.
One of the things that I noticed when I was working on the Smoky Generation, the oral history, Wild and Fire oral history project I developed, was I noticed that people who began their careers during the Great Yellowstone fires in '88, they witnessed the political fallout from the let burn, quote unquote, let burn policy, right? They saw how these managers were just skewered in the press and politically. And those seem to be the same people that were the most reticent to burn when they got into management positions later in their career. And that's one of my fears with some of these larger prescribed burns that have escaped and chewed through towns. Or in other cases where people might be bold and put fire on the ground in August, is that if something goes wrong, all of a sudden we've got an entire generation of fire.
Yeah, and in the meantime, the landscape is changing, right? So
Exactly.
by the
Yeah.
time that, maybe we get progress and we start letting lightning fires burn, by that time, maybe the whole Yuba watershed will have burned. So as the policy is regressing away from using prescribed burn and letting, lightning fires burn, like the whole chessboard is being reworked.
Yeah. 100%.
But it makes it hard for me to want to get invested in multi-year planning projects at this point because I don't feel like even if you guys had been successful in getting your planning work done, that necessarily your project would have ever gotten done just because of these things we're talking about.
And I think that's one of the reasons why CWI is also working on policy change. And, there are a lot of really amazing people that are trying to move that needle. And I think that effort needs to continue to be supported and funded, because until these constraints change, we're going to we're going to hit our heads against them, I think.
Look, we wouldn't be on this call having this conversation with you if it wasn't a funded project. This would just be another fire through an unfortunate forest. So
Right.
I think like not wanting, I get it, not wanting to engage, but like if we're not engaged, we're not telling the story, we're not capturing this, and we're not moving the needle.
Okay, back to talking about CWI and trying to push policy change. I looked at your website and your board of directors is 7 PhDs, a fire chief, and a political strategist. And then your advisory board is a fire chief, a fire administrator, um, a techie, and Bethany Hanna. And so where's the like what's the political strategy? Like where are the loggers? Where are the kind of root down prescribed fire people? Like is CWI it's a think tank, right? But like loggers think too. And like lots of people think, but just like and might not have a PhD. So why are you guys so heavy on the academics? Like where's that fit in with like trying to make things actually happen on the ground?
So CWI is still a very young organization, funded in 2021. And it was founded by primarily, like, the board that you're seeing now is still very much the founding board. But as the organization grows, the founding board, as with all organizations, the founding board will start to rotate off. And Marissa, who's the executive director, is actively working on developing that board. And I think as that happens, you'll start to see different skill sets and voices come into play. And I know that she's actively having conversations with people now and with people that I am really excited to see step into those roles. I personally, I run nonprofits. I've been involved in startup nonprofits a couple times over. And one of the sort of guiding principles of a good board is that you seek out the 3 W's: wisdom, work, or wealth. Wisdom is what you see on our board right now. Wealth isn't necessarily wealthy people, but people who have access to wealth or are willing to open those doors. And wealth in meaning philanthropy or grant funding and that sort of thing. And work is like, maybe you have an attorney on the board who's willing to help with contracting and that sort of thing. So actively doing work. We're heavy on the wisdom, and to round out the sort of a good nonprofit governing board, you need to add different perspectives and different skills to be able to move the organization forward.
Okay, so one of the big questions my listeners have is, do you guys have to give back the money? Like, what happens now? Like, you've got $6 million to burn a forest that's burned. What happens to the rest of the grant?
Yeah, and again, we started these conversations with the Cal Fire last year when the Basin Fire kicked off, and have already, started the conversations as the Garnet Fire happened. We've got initial support from Cal Fire to continue to use that money, and how we use that money is obviously going to have to change, but not necessarily giving it back, like refocusing the project, refocusing the geography. I think we've got opportunities that we're still trying to sort through. It's still pretty early in that process, but our intent and our hope is to continue to do some good work with that money.
Okay, and then the money was funded by polluters, right? By the California Climate, what is it, CCI? Right. So polluters like Chevron, refinery operators, they have to pay a tax on carbon. And this money is supposed to go into projects that help sequester carbon. And is the grant paying for your time right now to talk to me about this?
No, in fact, I'm on vacation.
Yeah,
Dang.
Visiting my family.
So, I've seen research that says that dead forests still sequester a lot of carbon. Those big trees are going to stand there for a long time. They're not going to sequester carbon for centuries. Um, what do you guys think of this kind of carbon overlay to all this work? Like, isn't it enough just to like preserve old growth because it's freaking amazing? Like, why do we have to like turn it into this like we're pretending that this is actually gonna like be significant at the global scale or something? But I think that most people who like look at the size of like the Earth and the atmosphere recognize that like 3,000 acres of trees is like really like a drop in the swimming pool. Um, and I know the money is kind of in carbon, and that's how the whole kind of game is being played right now.
When we first got to go out on the forest and got a pretty amazing tour from Malcolm, who's spent decades down there, I was not thinking about carbon. Like, I was thinking about how amazing those trees are, how amazing that landscape is. Getting to see some sites that were just uniquely amazing and culturally significant is what is what the loss of that forest for me is. Not the carbon, the carbon.
I do think, like you said, this is the way the system is set up right now. And see, I used to run a program for the Sacramento Tree Foundation called Urban Wood Rescue, where we took urban trees that were removed from the city and mill it into specialty lumber. And it was also funded through CCI money, and we actually calculated how much carbon each log was sequestering, and we counted how many logs we milled each year. And I joked that that you look at that, and then you look at the pet food industry and how much carbon is being produced by that industry. And I would always joke that with the amount of pets that the Sacramento Tree Foundation staff had compared to how much carbon we were sequestering in the logs, we probably canceled it out. So,
Right.
you're absolutely right. When you really, really, really look at it, it's hard to sort of reconcile these things. But also, what I care about is that there is investment being made in this work, that we've got really good people working on it, and good, generally good checks and balances with making sure the money is used the way it was for the projects. Is being used in the way it was intended, and that from a like community and landscape resilience, I see some really good projects out there that are doing that, and my hope is that we can build on those and begin to prioritize and do the work that you always talk about, these sort of the jigsaw puzzle, and can we create a more resilient landscape by making sure that these areas are getting treated in the places that are going to have the best impact for the longest amount of time.
Hmm. Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see what, like right now the fire's backing down into Dinky Creek, and I think there's gonna be some interesting kind of good fire portions of the story, even though the spot on the landscape we happen to care about the most really, it looks like parts of it really cooked hot. Man, what a f***ing week. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's just it's wild to watch this kind of slow motion, but it seems it's not like it's just routine now to me. Like, I wrote a kind of prioritization project for the South Lassen watersheds that was 850,000 acres between the Feather River and Highway 36. And we spent like 2 years on it. It was a lot of money. And we modeled and we drove around and I hiked in old growth forest with my kids and we wrote a plan and like, hey, we think you could burn here, you could do a fuel break here. We kind of developed, it was kind of pre-pods, but we kind of, used that concept and put a lot of our energy into this. But there was like zero prospect of any of it happening with the Forest Service's capability right now. And then the Dixie Fire, like within months of us publishing that report, the Dixie Fire burned like 600,000 acres of that 850,000 acre planting area. And a lot of it just at high severity. All like most of the old growth that I went out and hiked around. It was during the pandemic, so it was great. I took my 9-year-old and my 11-year-old out, and we like hiked around in these amazing old growth red fir forests, a lot like Teakettle. And that shit just got frickin' destroyed.
Yeah.
There was, I mean, I'm glad we got to see it before it happened. But to me, it's like I'm out. I'm retired from planning because the Forest Service isn't going to do anything with this. And like, yeah, why would I bother? I mean, I'm glad I got to go see it, but I spent years doing stuff like that, and it looks so easy on the map. And then
What
it's just like nothing ever gets done.
what do you think is the solution? What have you been chewing on?
Just fire. Just it's gonna all burn. Like it doesn't matter what we do, right? It's like we'll maybe I think the solution is follow up fires with prescribed burning, taking advantage of the fresh black,
Yeah.
burned in the puzzle.
Yeah.
But a lot of places the puzzle doesn't exist yet. So fires like you're getting right now are creating the puzzle. The Yuba River watershed, like it's a million acres, it's the next Dixie Fire. I don't think we're going to prevent it. I think accepting that even high severity fire it's just the train we're on. And so when I look at like portions of Dixie that looked really terrible after the fire, they're like beautiful black oak regen right now. And
Mm.
there's elk there. And the landscape's really resilient. And I think for us to it's like trying to stand in front of a runaway train. Like the train left the station 100 years ago when we cut down all the big trees and when we started putting out every fire. And there's now we just have to kind of get out of the way and see what it looks like after the train wreck.
Yeah. 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 I can, I'm right on the edge of the Caldor. I can see the scar from all south-facing windows of the house, and I don't know how to do this personally, but all I want to do is get in there in the next 5 years and burn. Because this tiny little community of Kiteburst and Silver Fork is just, not only is it going to be written off, but it's going to be forgotten and likely never rebuilt, if a fire does burn through here. So,
What's interesting if
um,
you look at like the scale at which industrial timberland owners are working, like the Bear
mm,
Fire, the Dixie, like they're they're working at this huge scale, 100,000 acres of salvage and herbicide and reforestation, and so it's not that this stuff is impossible to do. It's just that it's impossible right now for the feds to make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're in an interesting time where, like there's these huge like National Forest Foundation grants to work in the U, but to work in the Plumas. But then we hear that NFF won't burn anything, won't even burn piles because of liability. And so I think it'll be interesting in 5 years to look back at like, okay, what happened to that, several billion dollars from the wildfire crisis strategy? These huge projects that are getting done. Did it make a difference? Maybe it did. Maybe I'm just kind of grumbling here in my shed, you know, out of touch with what's really happening.
That's that's always my fear too.
Yeah.
You can have your finger on the pulse only so much, and um, I mean, thank God there's other work being done in conversations. And, a lot of my work is international. And so I hear some innovations that are happening in other places, and especially in emerging fire countries, and gives me hope. Um, but I helped work on a paper that sort of examined this concept of like we can, in terms of climate change, but if you have the lens of fire, we can mitigate, we can adapt, and both of those are sort of right on the edge of not being possible any longer with climate change. And the alternative is we can suffer. And so, so my driver right now is how do we lessen the amount of suffering and put it off for as long as possible.
Yeah.
And so, like if I think that's an incredibly like pessimistic way of viewing the world, but if I think about it that way, it gives me the motivation to actually find those projects that are having the impact and try and like accelerate and stimulate and motivate the work out there and support the good innovations, encourage the newcomers to the industry to really engage with practitioners to understand how these solutions should be built so that they can be implemented quickly and keep moving forward.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Don't just off yourself because it's so, I mean, I think the survival mechanism is definitely like, for me, the survival mechanism is like, hey, you got to get all right with fire burning wild on the landscape because it's a hurricane that you can't stop. And that there is a lot of beautiful things that come out after a fire. And we have to learn to focus on those. There'll be beautiful things that come out in Teakettle. But
Yeah,
but looking to a future with very little old growth is very painful.
it is.
And it's played out in my home landscape. Like huge amount of the old growth will never be there again for 500 years.
Yeah. How would you how would you tell this story, Zeke? You are telling the story, but in terms of the tea kettle, what is the takeaway you'd want people to have?
Well, it's easy for me to come at it and be like, well, why did CWI get $6 million? Like, who thought that you guys were the experts? But could anyone else have done it better? I'm just trying to tell as many different angles as I can, and I'm trying to weave it into threads that we cover here already, like the futility of managing forests for carbon, the lack of institutional support at the highest levels for the risk associated with prescribed fire, the difficulty in hitting windows, narrow windows, or the impossibility of that, like with our experience on the Tahoe, that, you end out with things that just are not implementable. And so like, what can we learn about like where, like, would it be better to try a project like this on the east side?
Hmm.
Would it be better to try a project like this at, 5,000 feet instead of 7,000 feet? It's interesting that it's an experimental forest. I think that's the interesting angle. It's like, okay, we've studied this a lot.
I was just gonna say there's a lot of information that come out. I'm just walking across that forest, like every tree standing, regardless of condition, standing on the ground has a tag on it. Like there's data on all of that, all of that. And
Yeah.
how that will be processed and analyzed after this fire will be, I don't know, but I think it could be there's endless amount of information that could be really, really interesting that could come out of this. I had crews that worked on the caples, the prep for the caples burn in the Calder. And I look at that, I'm like, oh, this can work. This can work. There are examples that do work and do make a difference and an impact. And so if we can just shoot for those.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think you're right. I think looking for the beauty in the black and figuring out how we can leverage that to the best of its ability is also an important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, and it's a tough sell because people are so pissed about the losses and all the narrative about, oh, they just monitored it for, the first day. It's like no one even knows if that stuff's true, but people decide to embrace the whatever philosophy they have. Oh, the Forest Service, they're at fault because they just don't fight fire anymore. They're just trying to like make money off of suppression, et cetera. Like all this kind of background noise and misinformation makes it so hard to even like find a place to kind of tie this conversation in.
Yeah.
And a lot of that's just this collective grief, right? Like everyone has grief and blame is the first step, right? And
Totally.
oftentimes we just don't move past that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I worry about, like I saw it's National Suicide Awareness Month, right, for firefighting, September, because September is when people start killing themselves because they lose their crew, they lose their sense of purpose, they come home and their family is shattered from them being gone for months and months. But I was thinking that like I feel like in my experience is that like being a firefighter and being asked to go put out all these low severity like simple lightning fires, like once you've spent time burning and like that those fires are doing great work on the landscape, that that when you spend a whole season putting out fires like that, you come back really jacked. Just like it's set up to ruin you, really, because you in your mind, that you're partly responsible for things like this happening. As firefighters, you look at the woods and you see it all choked, and then you're putting out the fire, the little white fir lightning fire that's got like 1 foot flame lengths backing through, killing small seedlings. And I think that we need to talk about that more. Just yeah, like you guys are suffering right now from this sense of loss of what could have been, and that is what firefighters like. They spend their entire lives in that milieu, and
And
like connecting what you're trying to do with the grief and um, finding the hope in it is really hard. I like that you guys have a storytelling lens to your work.
yeah, I think it's really important. And what you just mentioned, Zeke, is what I am moving into in my work now is I don't want to say culture change, but it is culture change. It's how do we empower wildland firefighters and wildland fire practitioners to um, I call it, suppression action as resilience action. So how can we fight fire in a way that actually builds resilience and achieves suppression objectives? And so much of what we do in the prescribed fire world could translate into that. But we need training that is infused with that resilience mindset. We do need some agency, the political will from the agency to support those decisions. But I spent 6 years on hotshot crews. I burned personally tens of thousands of acres, and it took me 20 years after leaving a hotshot crew to actually fully understand, and I don't know that I do, but fully understand cultural burning, and that you don't just burn to reduce risk. And that's, they always say clean black is safe black. Well, it's safe for that moment, but it actually defers risk to future years. And so how can we build those mindsets into the work that we're doing while we're suppressing fires without having to have those actions qualify as managed fire, right?
Hey,
And I think there's a way. I think there's a way. And I think a lot of it has to do with empowering those firefighters who are experiencing those griefs, who are sitting up on those ridgelines going, why are we even here? And giving them tools and strategies, tactics to be able to do those burnout operations in a way that suppresses the fire, stops it where it needs to be stopped, builds resilience, landscape and community resilience as they're doing it.
Yeah, I
And
always thought
that's where I'm hopeful.
yeah, I
That's the
also
work
thought it'd be
that I
good to
do.
have a page in the IRPG, in the pocket, the firefighter's pocket guide. There's a page that tells you how to refuse an assignment because of risk. And I was like, well, we need a page that tells you how to refuse an assignment because it's freaking stupid, right? And it's like, well, maybe that's where you're going, Bethany. Like you can like work on that curricula. Like, no, we're not doing this. This doesn't make any sense. Because I mean, what if every hotshot crew turned down assignments that were stupid, like hiking down in this hole to put out a fire that's like surrounded by black from a previous fire, like wait, like stuff that happens all the time.
All the
Like,
time. Yeah.
well, that would be action. That would be resilience action right there. Like all the crews say, no, we're not gonna do that. It's stupid. And then what are they gonna do? They're gonna, I don't know.
Well, I mean, the way the system's set up is they'd find another crew who will take the assignment. But for me, it's like we have to empower people to say, hey, that's not something I think we should be doing, but we could be doing this instead, and it would achieve these outcomes. And that's the piece, is like not just saying no, but actually like leading from behind, to get the objective. Firefighters in general have such an intimate understanding of the landscape and of fire. Why wouldn't we be depending on their expertise and their knowledge to be able to read that landscape? And one of the reasons why we put together a briefing paper, or sort of a briefing document for the Teakettle, was with the hope that if there were opportunities to go into the Teakettle before the main fire front came in there to put some good fire on the ground, that they would take it. The fire didn't burn in such a way that where that was possible, but and there's you've seen the terrain. There is no actual holding line, but we wanted to at least give them an understanding of what our objectives were for the project, and if there were opportunities, just to give them the information and knowledge, because I really do trust practitioners to be the best advocates for that.
Yeah, do what they can.
If given the
What I think
opportunity.
we really need to do that for everywhere, right? Like with the idea with pods too. It's like, hey, if you're going to put in dozer line, the thing is that people who are drawing the pods already think like ops people, as far as
Mhm.
that's.
Yep, yep,
But I think
yep.
that it's not enough just to kind of draw a pod on a map. The next step is like, well, let's go snag that ridge and put fire on the ground there, so we don't have to do that when there's a fire coming up the hill in August.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right, well, our hour is up. Um, Thank you guys. Thanks for coming on the lookout, and I'm sorry that your project burned up. And I'm looking forward to hearing what stories you guys can salvage from it.
Yeah, there is a
Thank,
story to tell, for sure. Thank
yeah,
you for
thanks,
having us.
And then I'm
thanks for the
stoked you
opportunity.
guys,
Appreciate it.
yeah, and I'm stoked you guys are working with Sashua and Coldwater Collective on that storytelling. Those guys are incredible, and really enjoyed working with them.
Yeah, they are incredible. And yeah, we're looking forward to moving this forward and sharing it with the world. I mean, that's the goal here is, let's get people thinking about it.
Okay, well, thanks for coming on.
Solutions. Thank you.
See you guys all
Thank you.
later.
Appreciate it.
Okay,
Okay, bye.
bye.